In the last video, I explained the agenda setting effect, and then using the memory-based model, explained why it works the way it does. I've been suggesting all along that the media is influential when it comes to people who are ambivalent, but not so much when it comes to people who are univalent. And additionally, the underlying definition of the subtle effects theory is the media is not particularly good at telling their audiences what to think, but they're particularly good at telling their audiences what to think about. And so I want to explore that a little bit more. First, I want to start off by asking the question, is the agenda setting effect a positive thing or a negative thing? Now that we know that the media does have this power to set the agenda, to shape what people are thinking about, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And there's no right or wrong answer to this. This is just a matter of opinion. And so what I want to do is sort of explore both options, positive and negative. I would argue that in some ways, the fact that the media is able to shape the agenda can be a very positive thing. How's that the case? Well, if the media are focusing on important major issues, and they're providing the coverage in a way that informs citizens, then citizens are going to be exposed to all this coverage, and they're going to be able to make choices that are informed. The fact that the media is able to say what these important issues are, and the fact that citizens follow the lead of the media can be a real positive thing. It can highlight the important issues, the media can, and citizens can then read about whatever the important issues are and make decisions. Those decisions can be on whether or not to support a particular policy. Those decisions might have to do with an election coming up and deciding which candidate they want to support. But I would argue that the agenda setting effect can make it more easy for citizens to perform their democratic function, to do what citizens in a democracy need to do. But it's also possible that the agenda setting effect can have a negative impact. And I want to explain why. And to do so, I have to return back to something I said in the very first video in this set of lecture videos. If you recall, I said that the single thing that ties together almost all media outlets is what? What are they primarily interested in? Hopefully you said making money. Right. They want to cover stories that people want to watch. They want to cover stories that are important, that not necessarily are the most important ones, but the ones that people are going to click on, the ones that people are going to read in the paper if they see it on a newsstand. That's what they want. They want to get as many eyeballs on their news as possible, because the more eyeballs they have on their news, then the more that they can charge advertisers to advertise in their programs. As a result of this, sometimes what the media does is they focus on information and provide information about issues that aren't really important. I'm going to call them minor issues for the purposes of this. But they'll focus on minor issues and provide citizens with a lot of information about something that is not particularly important or pressing at the time. But they're doing it because they want to get as many viewers as possible. They want to grow their audience as much as they possibly can. Well, if citizens are getting a lot of information about an issue that's not particularly important, we know by the agenda setting effect that if the media covers something, citizens think that issue is important, this can lead citizens to make unwise decisions or ill-informed decisions. And so I want to give you an example of what I'm talking about. Around the 1990s, there was a huge change in the way the media was structured. It used to be that especially local news programs, were really boring. Networks have to get approval to use the airwaves. And so as sort of an agreement for the federal government saying, okay, you can use the airwaves, they had to provide public services. They had to provide something to the citizens. And so they would do that by putting together news programs. These news programs were what we call loss leaders. Loss leaders, meaning they never made a profit. And the networks didn't care about that, because this was sort of their way of paying back to society by providing information. In return, they got to use the airwaves to broadcast their programs, not just news, but their entertainment programs. Around the 1990s, things change, and now large media organizations are buying up news outlets. And when they're buying them up, they're saying, hey, look, this whole thing about you don't have to make a profit, that's over with. You need to start making a profit. Your news programs need to be thinking about generating large audiences. Because I remember the news programs when I was younger, and they were just really boring. It'd be some old stodgy looking white guy sitting at a desk reading the news, and then they would go over to a news person, a weather person who would sort of tell the news in a real boring way. There weren't any amazing graphics. Now the news is really so dynamic, and people talking and graphics everywhere and all this stuff. Around that time, one of the things that was happening in the 1990s is the crime rate was going down. Or I guess in meeting with matching my graph, here we go. The crime rate, I don't even know how to do that. That is crazy. The crime rate was going down. My camera is flipped, and so it's hard to match the crime rate. But the actual crime rate was going down. This is the 1990s. This is when President Clinton was in office. There was a Republican-controlled Congress for much of that time, and sort of working together, they had created this very healthy economy, and so the economy was doing really well. Well, it's a standard sort of reaction to a good economy that the crime rate goes down. But at the same time that that was happening, what programs were realizing is that the way to attract an audience was to start your programs with stories about crime. For those of you who watch local news, what is on first? What are the first things that they show? Oftentimes what they'll show are crime reports, right? And the more graphic the crime report, the better. Around this time, this was the phrase that people used: if it bleeds, it leads. In other words, if you have some gory story that involves death and crime, put that on first, because people are going to watch it. So what was happening is, as the crime rate was going down, coverage of crime was going up. The news organizations started, realizing that if they put crime on first, people weren't going to change the station. They were going to watch it. And so all of a sudden, the amount of coverage of crime kept going up and up and up. Well, what do we know from the agenda setting effect? The more the media covers an issue, the more importance the public places on it. So while the media was not reporting that the crime rate was going up, that would have just been lying. They were just showing a lot more reports about crime. And from that, people assumed that crime was a bigger issue. They assumed that crime was a huge issue because the media was covering it. That's the agenda setting effect. The more the media covers an issue, the more importance people place on that issue. Now, if you're somebody running for office in the 1990s and you're trying to win over votes, what are you going to tell to people when you're trying to earn their votes? Hey, you guys, by the way, I know you think that crime is a big problem, but actually the crime rate's going down. Yeah, you can say that, you just won't get elected. So when you're running for office, instead, what you have to do is you have to say, to address the crime problem, I'm going to do this. And you talk about the crime problem like it's a big issue, like it's an important issue, like it's a pressing issue. When in fact, The crime rate is lower than it's been in many, many, many years. This is where the agenda setting effect can have a negative impact, because people can be not purposely misled, because that's not what the media was trying to do, but people can make an inaccurate inference. They can infer from the fact that the media is covering crime issues a lot, placing them at the front of the broadcast, reporting them with big headlines, that this must be a big issue, when in fact it's not. And so over time, what you had in the 1990s was a move by politicians to address the crime problem when there really wasn't a crime problem. Now, in the next video, I'm going to tie that back into the memory-based model and also explain who is and isn't likely to be affected by the agenda setting effect.